Hello, and welcome to the Rest, Repair, Recover podcast. I'm Susie Bolt. This is a space for anyone who's navigating chronic illness. We are here to share real stories, helpful insights, and honest conversations about what it really takes to help yourself heal a tiny bit every day. So whether you're in bed listening, you're on a gentle walk, or you're just needing some company as you go about your day, I'm so glad that you're here. So a very, very warm, and it is quite warm today, welcome to the wonderful Rebekah Aiston. And I have to say Hertfordshire, because she's been coming so long to class that, I don't know if people are watching this, if you're aware of the way that we run the rest repair classes, but we always like to have where people are in their Zoom screen so people can make connections. And so for over 3 years now, I've been saying Rebekah Aiston, Hertfordshire. Now, Rebekah, you're here and your name is Luke, but I know that's not your name. But
yes,
that's fine. It's fine. Sarah Glynn was there as Mrs. Christmas at one point on one of my interviews. That was quite funny. So Rebekah has been with the Rest, Repair, Recover family, I'm going to call it, because we do get to know each other really well, for a very long time, and has done what I'm going to call sort of the absolutely perfect example of a slow, gentle, no silver bullet seeking recovery. I've seen Rebekah absolutely at her worst, and I only got to meet her recently when she came on retreat. And for many months, Rebekah was joining our classes just from her bed. She'd log in from her bed. The curtains would be closed. She'd be lying with her face away from the window in a kind of semi-darkened state. And it was just to keep her company. And then at some point, I really distinctly remember you made it to a sitting up position in your bed. And then the big moment was when you made it onto the living room floor with your mat and your things, and you made it into a different room of the house. So Rebekah, I want you to share your story with everyone today, because it's kind of beautiful, because you've really done it with grace. And, you haven't actually, in all of the kind of watching of you and talking with you and observing you, you haven't been on this kind of panicked, anxiety driven sort of journey. You've taken it really gently. So I'm going to introduce everyone to the amazing Rebekah Aiston, Hertfordshire. And, why don't you tell us a little bit about when it started, so that everyone can get a sense of, okay, well, what story is she sharing? Is it like mine, or is it very different? So take us back if you can.
Okay, thank you. It's lovely to be here with you.
Mm-hmm.
My journey started in April 2020. It kind of started before that, like many people. I discovered later on in my kind of long COVID journey that actually I was a lot like many others, in that I think things started for me before I actually got COVID. But for now, I'll talk about what happened in April 2020, which was I woke up on the 17th of April in the middle of the night, and I thought, oh, I didn't feel very good. And I had this kind of very odd burning sensation on the top of my head, like an awful, awful headache, like nothing I'd ever experienced. And I thought, wow, this doesn't feel very good. And I remember it not being good, because I woke up my husband to say, can you just sit with me for a minute? Because I really don't feel very well. And I feel like something is very wrong. And he sort of stayed awake for about 10 minutes or so and was like, oh, you'll be okay. And, and I think I took a cup of paracetamol. Yeah. But my husband gets up at 5:30 every morning for work, bless him. So he was like, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. He probably just thought it was one of my normal kind of hormonal headaches or something. But yeah, I think the next morning I realized I think I managed to get back to sleep. But the next morning I remember thinking, gosh, I don't feel great. And I had the kind of very common 2-3 week initial period of feeling quite unwell, quite kind of fluey. I didn't kind of think straight away, oh, I've got COVID, because I didn't have a cough. And I'm trying to remember some of those classic symptoms that people were talking about in those very early days. And I thought, well, I don't have a cough, and I don't think I can't remember if I had a runny nose or not. Anyway, I didn't feel very well at all for 2 or 3 weeks. And then I sort of thought, right, come on, pull yourself together. I'm starting to feel a bit better here, surely. I think I'm starting to turn a little bit of a corner. And I started to try and do things like take the dog for a walk. And I remember trying to walk around the block and thinking, oh my God, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just walk around the block? And I was doing it, but I was really pushing through to be able to do kind of normal things. I was trying to hang up washing in the garden and I was exhausted. And I remember sitting in a chair in the garden thinking, I've got to try and move. And I remember trying to do some stretches and a little bit of yoga just sitting in a chair, but I was just exhausted. And the next sort of part that I remember was a couple of months down the line where it took a turn and the brutal and very debilitating fatigue kicked in. And that was when I kind of thought, oh dear, I think maybe there's something more to this. And I've got some kind of post-viral illness. Some of it's so foggy. Some of it, my recollection of it is a little bit vague. I think just because I was so poorly, and it was 4 years ago now. I can't remember at what point I contacted my GP. I can't remember the first time I ended up in A&E. I do know at about 3 months down the line or so, I do remember my husband being home from work. Maybe it was the first lockdown. Again, I'm not quite sure, but I remember saying to him, I really, really don't feel well. My breathing at this point, my breathing had started to be really bad. So I was breathless. I was very, very achy every single day. Like I couldn't believe how much my body ached, particularly in my arms. I couldn't control my body temperature. I had these symptoms and a low grade fever for about 7 months, kind of on and off. I just couldn't control my body temperature. I couldn't walk to the end of the road. I couldn't stand up for very long. I couldn't watch TV. I couldn't have conversations on the telephone. My hair started to fall out a little bit when my husband would very kindly try to get me to the bath and literally bathe me and have to wash me and wash my hair for me. And I remember him kind of making out like there was not that much hair coming out of my head. I was like, I know that one. That's okay. What's going on? I think I was getting rashes and all kinds. I mean, the list goes on and on. It was, but the most debilitating thing was probably the fatigue. Yeah, for sure. That was what made things really, really difficult. And I remember one day my husband being home with me and I said to him, I don't think I could get from the sofa to the bathroom alone. I just was so breathless and feeling so terrible. And I think we rang 111 and they said, we're going to send some paramedics out because we can hear that you're breathless. And I think that was the day they came and they said, gosh, you seem very poorly. I think they did something like an ECG and something was a little bit amiss. And they said, we're going to take you in. At which point I'm now terrified.
You're panicking. Yeah.
Panicking because I'm thinking, we've all been watching the news and we've seen these, these big hospitals being set up and all this terrifying information. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm now in the back of an ambulance. What's going to happen to me?
Right. You're taking me to the war zone.
Yes. And I really was quite scared. I think I was in tears back of the ambulance. And it was not a pleasant feeling. My husband stayed home with my son because I didn't want him to see that. And
he wasn't allowed in with you. I know when I went in, no one was allowed with me.
Yes. No, you're right. Yeah, of course. No, so no one could come with me anyway. No. I did a one-night stint, thank God. I did a one-night stint and it was, the usual kind of story of, well, we can't really see anything terribly wrong. We are sure you've had COVID and you are taking some time to recover. You just need to rest and you'll probably feel better soon. Just go home and rest. You'll be okay. And from that point on, there were a series of trips to A&E, I think a couple of times with some severe chest pains and nearly passing out and just some odd stuff went on.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could say I was starting to get better, but I was around the 7-8 month mark. I remember that was probably my lowest point. I think at about 8 months was my lowest point, when I remember saying to my husband, I just don't want to wake up tomorrow. I can't do this. I cannot do this. How is it physically possible for somebody to feel this ill every day for this long? How can I ache like this? Why can't I control my body temperature? By this point, I was definitely in touch with a GP. The burning headachy thing was awful as well. It was pretty much every other day. Um, I do remember in those early days, I did get sent for an MRI brain scan. It didn't reveal anything at all, really. And I did have a very supportive GP. In that sense, I was lucky. He was very willing to send me for blood tests. He was very willing to help in any way that he could. But of course, he couldn't really help me because he had no clue. He was in the dark as much as me, I think, other than having a little bit of knowledge about post-viral illness. Um, he was very sweet. I would call and we'd have updates and I'd be in tears and I'd say, I just don't know what to do. How can I be this poorly for this long? This is not normal. What's happening to me? And, he was lovely, but he wasn't a huge amount of help to me because he just didn't know. It wasn't his fault. I then got COVID again just after Christmas, and my husband got COVID from work, and he was ill over Christmas, in bed for 10 days, really quite poorly. And although he kind of isolated himself in a spare room, somehow I think his mum was staying with us at this point. I was very, very fortunate, I must just say, that my mother-in-law was a carer, and she lived with us occasionally when she wasn't doing her live-in care work. And so she was very sweet, and I was in such a bad way that actually she stopped caring for a while and came to stay with us and took very lovely care of me. And I was extremely grateful to have that help because my husband had to get back to work. I couldn't really, sometimes I found it difficult to get up and down the stairs on my own. So, she was here, she was helping, she took over the whole kind of cooking, housework, take care of everyone situation, which was fantastic. And I was very lucky. But yeah, so I got COVID, I think it was in January. And
what happened? What happened this time round?
Yeah, that knocked me pretty hard, I must say, because at this point I'm still pretty poorly. I think I was just starting to be able to kind of regulate my temperature and things, but it knocked me. I remember I recently looked back at some pictures of around that time. I looked awful. I mean, I really looked awful. I'd lost a lot of weight. The second time was a bit different. I had some different symptoms. I think I lost my sense of smell just for a few days, taste. Don't remember much else about it. Fatigue kicked in hard again. The second time wasn't great for me. But I think it wasn't too long after that I found you. I think it was a little while, perhaps a few weeks, a couple of months afterwards, that I was kind of looking around, as you do. I'd kind of stopped calling the doctor every couple of weeks because I was, there was not really much to say about it. So I started to do a little bit of my own research. Are there other people out there that are feeling like this? And, and then I think long COVID started to become a bit of a thing. Yeah. And yeah, that was when I found, somewhere on Facebook, I found you. And that was quite a turning point for me, to realize that I was not alone, that I wasn't the only very poorly person, because all of those things before that went through my head. What's wrong with me? Why am I so weak? Why can't I just shake this off? What other people? Obviously, there were people around me. My husband was poorly for 10 days, bang, back to work.
Yeah.
His mum was nearly 70. She was ill for a couple of weeks, bang, fine again. And I was like, what? I don't understand. Why me? What's happening? So it was a huge relief to find that I wasn't the only person, and it wasn't something to do with me or my personality that was wrong or weak, or, I did struggle with that quite a bit. But yeah, it was good to find people, in the same space.
So you found the Facebook group, and then you joined the Rest Repair Programme, didn't you? And we'd probably been up and running for about 8 months by then. And there was a nice community of people in there who, many of whom have now left because they're totally better and getting on with lives. And one of the things that has been really interesting for me about your journey is that at some point, I think you made a decision to stop trying to find the silver bullet, didn't you?
Yeah.
You stopped reading the
Yeah.
research, you stopped trying to take the next fashionable supplement, you stopped trying things out, and you were like, I'm
Yeah.
just going to do this, work with my body and work on my mindset and just look after myself. So
Yeah.
tell me what point that became your kind of protocol.
I mean, I think initially, the truth is, it wasn't that I was kind of going, oh, I'm just going to do this whole big holistic approach. To be fair, in the beginning, I simply didn't have the energy or the capacity to research, to email people, to ring doctors, I did have some, I don't even know who it was. I can't remember if it was a cardiologist. In the early part of 2021, I did have some kind of consultant appointment on the phone, and he was terribly empathetic and very lovely, but again, no real answers. And I remember ending that conversation and I was in floods of tears. And I think it was that point that I just thought, right,
Yeah.
they don't know what's wrong.
Mm.
I was trying very much to pay attention to the message that you were sharing about rest, about, really looking after myself, giving myself time and space. And I just thought, right, well, I'm just going to dedicate myself to trying this.
Mm.
And I don't think I wasn't at some huge point of acceptance then. I just didn't really know what else to do. I thought, well, this is what I have to try. There's literally no answers out there. And I didn't have the capacity to keep looking. I know other people perhaps had a bit more energy to do that, but I was so badly fatigued. I just simply didn't have the energy. So I just stopped because I thought that's using up, resources that I just don't have right now.
Absolutely.
And I think it helped that I had someone here helping to look after me. I think that might be when I found my therapist. Around that point, I realised that I was struggling terribly with my mental health. That 8-month mark was scary for me. I was really quite worried about my thought process, and it wasn't I didn't want to kill myself, or I just didn't want to wake up and feel like that anymore. Feel that poorly. And so I realised that I needed to work on my mental health.
Well done.
And I think it was at that point that I started realising that in the run-up to getting COVID, I had a history of chronic laryngitis.
Okay.
I was getting severe laryngitis every few months. I was a preschool teacher and a swimming teacher. So as a swimming teacher, I worked in a very hot and humid environment. I mean, best place to pick up a bug, swimming pool. That hot, humid space, lots and lots of children. Sometimes like 60 kids a day with snotty noses, and so laryngitis was my thing. I was very good at getting laryngitis every few months, and at one point I remember having it for 6 weeks. And I'm not the sort of person, I'm not one of these kind of real overachievers, go, 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 go. But I'm very conscientious about my work. And so I would push through because I didn't want to let them down. I would literally, thankfully, swim teaching is a lot of demonstration. So I would literally have no voice and just do demonstrations with my arms, as to what I wanted my kids to do. And it wasn't very pleasant. And so I just had that, that kind of culture of pushing through when you're poorly, because
this is what I'm dealing with. I have to go to work. I'll just deal with it the best way I can. Yeah.
I had a term time job. They were relying on me. I was a supervisor as well. So I just didn't want to let anybody down, that usual thing. So I'd have a couple of days off. But when it starts getting to 5 or 6 weeks, it was like, I can't be off for 5 weeks. I'm just going to have to push through,
Right.
And at the end of 2019, so just before the whole pandemic started, I was diagnosed with walking pneumonia.
Wow.
Saw some funny particles on my lungs, and I think I remember having 3 lots of chest x-rays in the end, and I was diagnosed with walking pneumonia, and I knew that I wasn't feeling myself. But I think by this point I'd gotten so used to feeling rubbish that that was what I was kind of used to. I just thought, oh, I'm tired, I'm a mum, I'm working, it's normal. But clearly it wasn't really normal.
Right. So
So
let me just stop you a second. Was this the first time in your life that you've had kind of a run of illness going on for you, or has that been something from your history as well?
yeah, a little bit from my history, to be
Yeah.
honest. I've had phases, cycles in my life where there was a point where in my early 20s, where I was getting lots of urinary tract infections. I haven't pursued this. I'm almost sure I have MCAS. I've always sort of allergy type symptoms. I have.
Can I just stop you there? Some of the most extreme visible symptoms that I've seen on any of our students have been your facial swellings that have occurred,
Yeah,
that have been an extraordinary, allergic response to something that you've never really found out what it was, right?
yeah. Well,
But
I mean,
the
I know
whole
when it
side of your
started.
face came up. Goodness.
Yeah, I mean that's the next bit of the story, really. That was my reaction. That first started. I mean, I was getting rashes. I've always been a bit of an allergic-y type person. I've
Right.
never had sort of an EpiPen or anything like that, but I do have a history of, issues. I have a history of IBS, but I'm very also through therapy, I'm very aware that a lot of that was due, I think, to childhood trauma.
Yeah.
I did have a very difficult time as a child and particularly as a teen. My mother was an alcoholic and I had a pretty tough time with all of that. And yeah, that's an understatement.
So let me just say for clarity here, I think it's really great that you're bringing this up because there is so much research out there now that pinpoints, if you have acute childhood experiences, ACEs, as they are called in the ACEs study, you are much more likely, not 100% guaranteed, but much more likely to go on to develop in later life and actually in childhood for many, a compromised immune system, which can lead to straight away gut issues, allergy issues, chronic illness, chronic inflammation later on in life. So, more and more people, once we talk about this in the work that we do in the groups and in the live sessions, more and more people are putting that piece of the puzzle in and going, oh, okay.
Mm.
So, yeah, there's been some stuff in my past. Yes, I may have had some health issues as an adult, maybe more than other people around me, but so these things can definitely be linked to some people's stories. Now, it's not the way in for everybody, but for many, many people, a very, very reactionary body is one that has sometimes in the past been dealing with acute childhood experiences, which have paved the way to this point in their health journey. So, yeah, great. So
Yeah.
tell me about at what point in the journey did all of that really start to kick in? Because I don't know, I don't remember. I just remember
Yeah.
seeing your pictures. She would share these pictures in the Facebook group, and we'd all just be kind of, what the heck? What's going on with Rebekah?
Yeah. So I mean, that was, I started the therapy around the time that I found you, and I started making connections to the past, the childhood things. And that was kind of when I knew that if I was going to get better, I was going to have to go on a bit of a holistic journey, that this was going to be a whole kind of mind, body. And I thought, gosh, I think I also just want to quickly say that I did struggle with I've had periods of very severe anxiety in my adult life. So I also am aware that I had put my body under a huge amount of stress at times with fight or flight. And I mean, it would last, I'm not talking about panic attacks, I'm talking about anxiety that would last for days. I never wanted to have medication for lots of reasons. My mum managed to get sober. So for the second half of our relationship, my mum was sober for 20 years before she passed away. And she was in rehab, she learned a lot about the holistic approach, about mind body, about she had her own childhood trauma. So I learned a lot of fantastic and valuable lessons from my mum. And I suddenly started realizing that the things that she had spoken about were making sense to me. So I realized what I kind of needed to do and what was going on. And I knew the reason I would get more anxious when I was anxious, because I knew how bad it was for my body to be in that fight or flight state, but I just got stuck in this awful cycle. So anyway, I started to work with a therapist. I was doing the work with RRR, and I just started to feel a bit safer, a bit better. I think I told you on the retreat that I I enjoyed the classes and the connection so much that when they would end, I would cry because I knew that I'd have to spend the rest of the day getting through and managing things on my own. Because at this point, I think my mum-in-law started to go back to caring. My husband was at work, my son was at school, and they were quite long days alone with, because I was pretty much still relatively housebound, I think, at that point. And so I would cry when you would go, and I'm going to leave you here, goodbye. And I'd go, oh, don't leave me. Oh God, it was awful. But then it made me look forward. It gave me structure. It gave me something to look forward to, a bit of a purpose again. We then got into this phase, didn't we? I think sometime in 21 where we started to vaccinate.
Yeah.
My first 2 vaccines were okay. I think they caused me some symptoms and some quite bad fatigue. And I was just plodding along. There was a period where I was just kind of at your kind of what we would say, level 0.51 for a very long time. I was doing the stuff from bed. And then, there was quite a long period. I think maybe about a year of just.
Let me just explain what Rebekah means here. So in the Rest Repair program, we have a level structure. And it's all self-assessed. You're in charge of what level you're at, and people can people can move up and down between the levels according to how they feel on the day. So it's not graded exercise in any way, shape, or form. It is just kind of, where am I today? At what level should I work? But the thing that we insisted is, if you're new, you come in at level 0 and you just watch and you don't try things out, because we know the human condition is to come in and try hard. So it's about relearning how to approach any kinds of class or any kind of course, program, instruction, movement, whatever, and just to come into a place where you're really underachieving and literally, getting yourself to the point where you're bored. That's a very good sign. When you're very ill, you're not bored. You're in survival mode. When you experience boredom, that's a really good sign that you could perhaps do a little bit more. So Rebekah came in that kind of limbo land between, I'm in survival mode, but I'm also beginning to get a little bit bored. So you could start to do a tiny bit more after a period of time, which was great.
Yeah.
And we saw that moment with you, and it was beautiful.
Yeah. So that first year, I stayed at that kind of, low level, and I kept listening every time to what you would say about don't push, and you don't need to be looking at people that are doing more than you, and just concentrate on what you're able to do. And that was always really helpful to me. I always took that on board. And I think I felt like I was starting to see, obviously, green shoots, and the therapy was really, really helpful. And then I had the booster. And I know that the whole vaccine thing is controversial. But my experience is that I went and had my booster because I was trying to do the right thing, and because I was terrified of getting COVID again and it being worse, or. So I kind of did what I thought was the right thing, and I went off and had the booster. And 7 hours after that booster, I was eating dinner, and I thought I'd just bitten my lip. But I thought, oh, did I bite my lip? But I didn't feel like I'd bitten it. And I thought, my lip's all puffy. And within half an hour, my bottom lip was hugely swollen. The side of my face started to swell. My throat started to feel funny, and it was happening quite rapidly. And I took an antihistamine, but it was one of those ones that you take like one a day. It wasn't anything strong, or it was nowhere near enough. It kept going. And I said to my husband, okay, this is not looking good. And I've had the vaccine. Let's go to hospital again. So off we went. At this point, I am not feeling good again. I am very anxious. And so I just didn't have the energy to argue back when in A&E, despite it being 7 hours since I'd had that vaccine, they said, we don't think this is a reaction to the vaccine, because if it was going to be a reaction, it would have happened immediately. And so I just remember thinking, I just thought, oh, okay, well, and I just think I had terrible fatigue by this point because, as lots of us know now, that when you get very stressed and you get emotional, it, you know,
Shut down.
Yeah.
Sounds. Yeah. Yeah.
And I was exhausted. I think when I went in, they pumped me full of, they saw straight away that something was, it was out of control. And I can't really remember. I think I got pumped full of steroids and God knows what. And I just took it because I was scared, my throat was closing. And I just took whatever they gave me. But I then was left to sit in A&E for about 6 hours. So this is now at about 4 a.m. I'm exhausted. I'm tearful. I'm all by myself. I don't think we were allowed people with us still again at this point. I can't really remember, but I was definitely alone. And yeah, so when I finally actually got to see a doctor, they said to me, knock on the door. If anything feels worse or it's changing, knock on the door and we'll see you. But for now, take a seat. We'll see you when we can. And I think I was there for most of the night. And by the time I saw someone, their reaction was this, we don't think this is a vaccine response. I mean, I don't know to this day what all that was about. I mean, it seems shocking to me and it's quite upsetting when I think about it now. It's one of the hardest things to think back on. So I'm going to move on from it. But yeah, it was hard.
So tell us what happened. Let's fast forward like 3 months. So how long did it take you to pull out of that response?
Well, it wasn't it wasn't so much a fatigue kind of response. The severe response I continued to have from that was terrible digestive issues. Something happened. So before this, I know lots of people suffered with digestive issues with long COVID. I hadn't. It hadn't been an issue for me.
That started for you.
Oh, wow. It was probably one of my worst symptoms overall in the end, because it was very difficult to eat anything. I then had to start going on quite restrictive diets, try this, try that. I think this is the point where I got a nutritionist involved and said, like, help me. I can't eat anything. I flat. What do I do? And we started working a little bit on histamine issues and inflammation, of course. And I just kept getting these random swellings and we weren't sure what it was. But I think we sort of agreed it was some kind of histamine response. Mm-hmm. Again, I was a little bit reluctant, though, to go hard on completely excluding too much stuff. So I just sort of did a general kind of watch your gluten, watch your dairy, caffeine, alcohol, which kind of wasn't doing much of that anyway. And I think that took me another 8 months, year to really start to calm down. I, again, obviously, because of that reaction, got sent to see an immunologist who said, please don't touch the vaccine again. And we are seeing these responses to the vaccine. It was the vaccine that caused that response. It must have been. Yeah. They suggested that I maybe go and get checked out for MCAS. That's another side story. That was almost impossible to get sorted. I just kept getting bounced from one place to another. And in the end, I just went, oh, God, leave it.
Well, MCAS is a really difficult thing to get a diagnosis for, and it's not talked about enough, particularly. It's certainly not taught at medical school. So, lots of doctors are kind of, I need to look this up. I don't even know what you're talking about. So, wow. Okay. I mean, just listening to your symptoms, it's very MCAS-y in its kind of type. So I think that's the route that you've gone down now, isn't it? That's part of my systemic response. That's what's going on for me, and I'm going to treat it accordingly.
Yeah.
So tell us, kind of fast forward us a bit further, because I don't know where we are at this point. Are we 21 or 22 now?
I think now we're 22. Yeah, we're at least 22, if not into 23, I think now, because it was a good 8 months to a year of me having to continue to focus on the classes, continue very much on my digestion and my diet. At the same time, I was doing a lot of work on my mental health. And at this point, I'm starting to realize that I need to maybe look at changing some of the things that I'm doing. So one of those being that it was probably not a good idea for me to go back to the swim teaching for the foreseeable, because I had been very poorly for 2, 3, maybe even 4 years before this all happened. And I started making that connection potentially with that environment, with chlorine. It was quite a stressful job being a supervisor there. Slightly toxic workplace. And I don't mean toxic chlorine. I mean, unfortunately,
the way that the culture of the environment of
yes.
where you were working.
And I had been sweeping that under the carpet for quite some time. It was a term time job. It paid very well. It worked around my son. So I kind of kept making it.
Stuck it out.
Yeah, I stuck it out. And so I started to make the connection that perhaps I needed to start thinking about doing something different. And obviously, one of the hardest parts of the journey is the whole kind of, loss of job, loss of purpose, guilt, shame, all that comes with that. I had conversations with people because I had a history of anxiety. It was extremely frustrating for people to keep mentioning anxiety to me, that perhaps I was just anxious, and perhaps if I just got myself back to work, or if I just kept busy, I would feel better. Surely I would just feel better like everybody else,
What's wrong with you that you can't do this?
Most people recover. So it took a lot. I'm really proud of the fact that I was able to that was when I started to really learn about setting boundaries as well. I need to set boundaries for myself with some of these people that just don't get it. I used to get so angry and frustrated and upset. And through the conversations we would have, on a Thursday after the ORR class, we'd have those chats. And I was listening to what people were saying, and I was taking everything on board. And I knew that I had to separate myself from some of my relationships. And I started to understand. So probably in 23 was when I started to understand the mind-body connection as well. I started to realize that at this point, some of my symptoms were becoming quite kind of fear related. I would get myself in a bit of a cycle of being very worked up. I was so scared of the fatigue, so scared of PM, that I was starting to really limit myself. And that was a difficult phase too, because I was starting to feel better. I was moving up, in the classes, and I was kind of thinking, right, okay, things are changing. I'm feeling better, but there was definitely such a lot of fear,
And what we know is fear stokes the bonfire of this reaction internally.
Yeah.
So where there's fear, there is more symptom. Where there's fear, there's, someone who's just really going to struggle to get through that wall onto the other side. And of course, fear is inevitable because it's terrifying. Yeah. So that's a really big piece of work that often people find the hardest thing to do. How do I stop being afraid of my body and what it's doing?
Yeah.
And especially because, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, well, so much of the work that we do in the Rest Repair program is in the safety of your home. So people sometimes go, right, well, I'm at level 3 here and I can lift some little weights and I can do a little bit of this and I can stand up and do a bit of yoga. But actually, as soon as I leave the house, the fear kicks in and the body goes onto high alert. And then it goes, no, we're not safe out here. We've got to shut you down. Get back in the house. Stay in the house.
Yeah.
Don't go anywhere. Don't leave.
Yeah.
I really compromising.
I definitely started to recognize that. And I had the capacity now to start to kind of listen to audio books and to read. And so I read some of the classics that people have shared. Is it Alan Gordon? And, and I started understanding about somatic tracking, and I started to try and do a bit of work on that. Still doing lots of therapy. I must say.
Can I just say the name of the book? So,
yeah.
So if you're listening to this, there is some feedback on Rebekah's microphone, but just bear with us. I'm so sorry. The book that Rebekah is mentioning here is The Way Out by Dr. Alan Gordon. So somatic tracking, he talks about it. It's a process to basically train the brain out of that fear mode. The brain is a fabulous thing for keeping us safe. Okay. As soon as something happens, it makes a link. It says, oh, that was bad. So therefore, I'm going to make sure we don't expose ourselves to that again. So what can happen is in that vulnerable stage of coming out of illness, you might go and do a walk that's a little bit too strong. And the brain goes, oh, no, that's too much. That was too much. You're tired. And we don't want to get tired. So the association with doing a walk becomes really linked into the brain's processes so that when we even think about doing a walk again, it's like, oh, no, you can't do a walk. So we have a brilliant brain. It's always working to keep us safe. But it will also become part of the problem. We do need to do really gentle things like somatic tracking, where we come into a state of signaling internally that it's okay. The body is safe. And I'm not saying push through and go for a big run. I'm just saying start to link doing gentle, joyful things as being safe things rather than things that cause you threat. So I love that you're talking about that, because it's such an important piece of this whole thing. And it's a piece of the recovery that you have to do, especially if you've been ill for a long time. You have to get the brain to come out of fear and panic and keeping you safe mode. Sounds like, well,
I think equally there is a bit of not a time and a place, but a time in your recovery where you are maybe more ready to accept that. I think earlier I just didn't have the capacity and I didn't really understand it. And when I would see people recovering and saying, oh, well, I did this and, my body, and I would think, oh my God, shut up. I can't, what are you talking about? I cannot think my way out of this. I've tried, but but actually it's more complex than that. And
it's way more complex. And you're absolutely right. There is a time, and you'll be getting more of those windows of, I'm having a few more good days, and then the bad days still come. That's a really good sign that you're ready to tackle that piece. But, listening to your story and hearing your reaction to the booster, no, you're not going to train yourself out of that one overnight. That one needs to be managed from literally a 360 perspective, which you did brilliantly. And then the point again where you're going, now I know that the fear is keeping me stuck.
Yeah.
And I want to change that.
I did become very aware of that feeling. I noticed, I would be getting ready to drive somewhere and I would start to feel tired and my heart rate would go up. And I mean, I've sort of failed to mention some of the things that I clearly had, but because I just didn't have the energy to go out and, chase doctors. And I definitely think I had dysautonomia. I think I had POTS. Just from watching the other videos that you've done, I was kind of like, oh, I was having that. Oh, I was having that. And it's interesting. I think it's important to say, and it's not to say that this is the route for everyone. And also equally, we know so much more now than we did when we was really poorly. So I'm not saying don't go out and get that help. I'm not saying that at all. But what I find interesting is that without any kind of antihistamines, without any kind of beta blockers or any medication at all, I have healed. I have managed to heal. And I just think that is...
Let me just re-clarify that so this comment isn't lost. You didn't take antihistamines despite having MCAS, which I'm still a bit like, I don't understand why. But anyway, she chose not to. And here she's saying, I'm grand. She didn't take beta blockers for the heart thing. She didn't go down the medication route. This woman has not gone down the medication route. She's chosen not to. For whatever reason, we don't even need to unpack that. And it's still, your recovery has still happened.
Yes. Yeah. I think it is important to note that. And I know that's not the way for everybody. And I have my own reasons for not wanting to take medications necessarily, past bad experiences, a little bit of health anxiety. I also have a history of blood clotting and mini stroke. So sometimes medications for me can be a little bit complicated. And so, but the point being that I didn't have the energy or the capacity in the beginning and also nobody knew really what was wrong. And I now know that I had a whole host of these things going on, but it just goes to show that when you really, really do take care of yourself. And I decided that my recovery was going to win. When I was so upset about losing my job and, at about 2 years in, I thought, right, my job is recovery. That's my job. And it was a full-time job. That's the truth. It was a roller coaster. The amount of times that I had to dig deep mentally to pick myself up each time there was a dip or a crash or whatever you want to call it, and things like that. I started to change my language, having listened to Alan Gordon, having joined the classes literally week in and week out. I was trying to take on board of those messages. As I started to feel better, I think a big turning point for me, there were a couple of really big things that helped. One of them I must mention was that so before it became a thing in RRR that you could find a recovery buddy, I connected with somebody through the group. I think it was over a love of Strictly Come Dancing. She made a comment. I made a comment. We bonded, and I found this incredible, incredible friendship with someone in the group, and that was an absolute game changer, because we still to this day we message most days. So we voice note and we message, and having that connection, having somebody that completely and utterly understood how difficult this journey was, the highs, the lows, the mental battle, having that person to connect with was I sometimes say to her, like, how am I ever going to thank you? Like, I feel like you've literally saved my life. And she says, well, how am I ever going to thank you? And we have this competition about who's gonna, how are we gonna, what will we do for each other? But she, she's been incredible. And I think around not long after that, we started the whole, if you would like to have a recovery buddy and the benefits.
Nice. Yeah. So let me just make a note on that, because I'm sure some people watching will go, I want a recovery buddy. So we did have someone who was pairing people, and we had a massive demand, and I don't, some of those kind of pairings will have worked well and some of them won't. I think it's a very complex relationship having a recovery buddy, because if you're looking for a recovery support kind of partner and you're not able to offer support to in both ways, it can be really hard work for one person to be holding someone else's grief whilst also dealing with their own stuff. So we realized quite quickly that actually it needed a better kind of protocol. And we tend to now encourage people to come back into the Facebook group, which is for the Rest, Repair, Recover program only, not the big Facebook group. And to seek many buddies, to create groups. And actually, one of the things that we then did, well, actually, we've done it for a few years now, is set up the Fern Programme, which it literally brings together a group of people who become dedicated buddies for each other. And from there, we see amazing things sort of happening, and, literally people getting together from all over the world now, kind of going, wow, I'm going to meet my Fern group. So actually, we know it's important to find someone to be your kind of cheerleader, your empathy, your shoulder to kind of cry on, that really gets it. And it's not the easiest thing. So I want to really praise the relationship. What's her name?
Rachel.
I want to praise you and Rachel here, because, you're one of the friendships that has really, really, really survived and thrived in this difficult time without either of you leaning on each other too much, and there being this incredible, respectful friendship that has grown. That, hats off to you. Well done. Amazing.
We did have a really good understanding. We would say, if you're too tired, so we would message, and I'd say, if you're too tired, you do not need to respond to me today. And sometimes she wouldn't, and sometimes I wouldn't. And we were really respectful, and that's why it worked. There were kind of boundaries in place. We had this kind of agreement from the off, and I just think I was very fortunate to find somebody so lovely who had that same kind of want from it as I did. It was very much, we both wanted to get better. We were both determined to get better. It wasn't about constant complaining and symptoms. It was about, okay, so I'm having a tough day. What can I do to help you? Or you're having a tough day. What can I do? I'm having a tough day. Can you help with this funk? And we would laugh. I mean, I don't know how many times I've cried on the phone to her, but equally, we have laughed so much. I mean, there has been so much laughter and joy in that relationship. I cannot tell you. We've met a few times. That's always been, our families have become friends. Her wife is amazing. They're like aunties to my son now. My husband loves them, and I do just want to say as well that I've been really lucky in that overall I've had really good support, which has been important. My husband has been incredible. I don't know that I would have had the same kind of patience and dedication as he has had. I don't think I'm as patient as he is. And as much as that was incredible, and I had good family support, having Rachel was different, because it was someone who really, really got it and understood. So that's been a really huge part of my recovery. And I think we've encouraged each other to get better, to find ways of coping. And she's also done a very kind of more holistic approach. I don't even know if she ever bothered to speak to her GP after about the first 6 months, and she's at the 4-year mark too. So we both just went, let's find other ways to get better.
Right. The thing that I want to say here is I really love, I hear you talk about health anxiety. I hear you talk about your acute childhood experiences. And I also hear you talk about the fact that you know that they were things that were going to hold you back and that you needed to work on them. And one of the things that I see time and time again is people who are very much in their anxiety and unwilling to look around the edges of it to see that there is another space that's worth working to get to, that there isn't anything outside of the health anxiety. And actually that is probably one of the most stuck places that I see people in. And I hope anyone listening to this that's got health anxiety, that's really, really caught up in the I'm never going to get better. Oh my God, if I do that, it will make me sick. Oh, I can't go there. That terrible, terrible, terrible kind of internal dialogue, constantly creating fear within the body. There is another way of thinking. You will need help, because the anxiety is there for a genuine reason. The brain has gone, that was not good. We are going to keep you safe. Anxiety is part of our survival techniques as a human creature. It makes us worry about things in order to prevent them from happening. The thing that becomes the problem is, the thing that's happened to your health has been so consuming. The anxiety serves to shut down your life almost completely, which is an incredibly unhelpful and unhealthy way of being. So if you are watching this, know that, you can get help from whatever reasons. So many people seek help from therapy. If you don't find the right therapist, find a different one, but definitely get someone to help you. Even if you don't have acute childhood experiences or a history of trauma, the thing that you're living with this journey, with this health challenge, is tough enough. It's absolutely tough enough. And so to be able to talk to someone in the way that Rebekah's saying, I talked to someone with my recovery buddy, never mind your therapist, every day, and having that space that someone goes, I hear you. And I know this is hard. That is so, so transformative. Your nervous system then goes, oh, I'm heard. I'm real. These are real things. Well, maybe I can relax a bit. And that begins the process of unstitching some of this fear. So I really want to acknowledge, all of the different choices that you've made, which have been so helpful to you, and how fantastic that you've had the courage, to go, I'm not going to take drugs. I am going to talk a lot.
Yeah.
I work on my diet. Obviously, for so many people, getting gut health is absolutely key to this, but getting your mental health as well is one of the biggest and most important things. Don't resign yourself into a state of, well, this is just it. Don't resign yourself to that. I think that's, once you've kind of given up, then you're stuck there. And I think, it's lovely to hear Rebekah's story, because we know that she didn't give up. She just kept finding new avenues to explore. So just tell me, I'm aware we're kind of going to be running out of time. Tell me how you are now. So we met at the retreat a few weeks ago, and I had a specific retreat for people who were coming out of this journey and getting back into life. And it was very much about checking in with where we were now and giving ourselves permission to let go of some of this stuff, some of the upset, the trauma, the identity of being unwell. We kind of let go of it, didn't we? There was a bit of a ceremony we did at the end.
Yes.
How are you now, especially after going through that process?
Yeah. So obviously, I mean, things are much, much better now. I think I started to really feel a difference at the end of 2023. So towards the end of 2023, I could just feel a change. I had started to do a bit of voluntary work, which was great for my self-esteem. And I know that everybody is not in the same position as me. I was fortunate in that I didn't have to rush back to work. I started voluntary because I felt like that would take the pressure off. But I just needed somewhere to be. I wanted to be able to build up in a slow, consistent way without the pressure. And if I didn't feel up to it, I wouldn't go. Funnily enough, I did that for a year. And in that year, I think I missed one of my days, just one of them. And so that was building up those positive, good experiences. I can do this. I've got this. So that was a huge turning point for me. Um, Obviously the therapy, I continued to do the therapy, it was still helping. And I just noticed, I think I just started to notice a real shift at the end of last year. Something felt very different. I just knew that I was starting to really heal. The fear was lessening. I could do more and more. Um, and then, of course, I came on the retreat, um, which was, I nearly didn't. I nearly didn't because I was really nervous, really nervous. I felt like I was, I know that I was doing the voluntary work, but I felt like my world had still become quite small. And so I could tell that I was still quite fearful and I was kind of living in this little safe bubble of things that I know I can do. And this is okay. I'm okay with this. Um, and I thought, I don't want to, I need to come out of that bubble again. I need to lessen the fear. And I didn't really know what I was expecting from the retreat. I must admit, you did catch us a little bit off guard with some of it. But again, completely underestimated the power of being in a space with 15 or so other people that completely and utterly understood what I had been through, where I had come from, into this space of, oh, things are starting to change and I'm getting there, and I would pretty much say I'm at the recovered point. That was the difficult. I mean, I struggled with that for months. At what point do I say I'm recovered? And for me, I think part of that was once I was able to get back to work, and my voluntary work has now turned into 2 days paid work.
Yes.
Which is great, which is great. So there's been a very slow build up to that. But yeah, the power of being in that space with people that have been on the same journey was really quite incredible. And it was quite, I would say it was a bit of a life-changing experience for me. I'd reached a certain level of acceptance anyway about the type of person that I am, about my history. Um, it was amazing to share some of the worst parts of being really poorly, some of those challenges. I've forgotten to mention, I just feel this is really important. I've forgotten to mention that at one point I did start to use a wheelchair. And I just want to slip that in because I think it's so important to know that using those kinds of aids or asking for help with certain things is okay. I do remember when I first got in that wheelchair, I thought, if I get in this, am I ever going to get out? I felt like I was giving in. But, and that was one of the biggest challenges for me as well. But actually doing that enabled me to spend more time outside, spend more time with family and friends, which I realized, especially from your advice, was so important. I needed to be able to be outside with other people and connect and have joy. And that was such a big part of it too. So I think, I think the retreat helped me to process some of those really challenging times, and there were lots of tears, lots and lots of tears, but there was even more laughter. I think if you run that, anyone listening to this, if Susie runs that again, do it. Because I just cannot explain just how, I don't know, I can't really think of the words. It was just fantastic that you had the perfect balance of working through things, but then bringing joy into it, and that balance of processing, but then doing something really joyful was just fantastic. And it just made such a difference. I've made some lovely friendships, still messaging at the moment. We're still messaging, right, and, checking in on each other. And it was.
So one of the things that I've been really aware myself, just from having done the journey, from having watched thousands of people do this journey too, the journey itself then becomes part of the acute experiences that sit in our nervous systems. And I've been really, really aware that actually there needs to be a recovery from the journey for those people that are coming up and out for air. And what better, to do it, as we know, in connection with other people that totally understand. And you can kind of go into those deep and quite intense moments, transformational moments, and then shake it off really quickly, because it's like we're instantly met with empathy. We're instantly met with understanding. No one needs you to explain anything else other than maybe the title that you've given whatever subject you wanted to kind of raise. And everyone just goes, oh, yeah, you get it. And then bang. It's so important for us to be, especially if we are more prone to this kind of thing. If you have got a system that is a bit more pro-inflammatory, a bit more responsive, a little bit more spicy, we do need to make sure the cupboards that we hold all of our stress in are regularly opened out and flushed and washed and dusted. And I think, one of the things I've realized as a kind of a host, a program leader, is that this experience in itself also needs to be flushed out of our systems, and to give it permission to kind of, go with grace and respect and to acknowledge what we've learned from it, which is why I wanted to trial that retreat. Are there people that need this? And I think I came away really clear. Yes.
Yes. 100%. And that's exactly what it was. It was letting go of that journey. I needed time to recover and space to let go of everything that I'd been through, because it was still weighing me down. I still, today I can sit here and I can talk about what happened and, those early days and how awful it was and how scary and how anxious I was. And I can do it without crumbling emotionally. If you'd have asked me to have this conversation with you, even maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I don't know that I could have held myself together in the same way that I can. And
she said no multiple times. I'm just saying.
I needed to be ready. But yeah, I think that the retreat really helped me to let go of a lot of that stuff. It also helped me to let go of fear, because I realized that I wasn't the only one that was a little bit fearful of the future and what lies in store, and will I ever experience anything like this again? And and I you don't know this, but the day after I got home, so let's bear in mind that the last day of the retreat was quite a busy day, and I had a relatively longish, busy drive home on the M25, and it was pouring with rain and it was a bit stressful. And I got home and I had a house full of people because my sister was visiting from Australia with her children and her husband. And I had no time to land, really. I got home 5 minutes later, I had a house full of people. The very next day after the retreat was my sister's last day in the country. And we went into London and we went to see the changing of the guard. We went to lunch on the South Bank. We went to Tower Bridge. I walked further in that day than I have walked in 4 years, with practically zero fear. I had a tiny wobble just before lunch, but I realized that I should have eaten a snack and I should have drunk more. But I ate and I was full of beans, and I cannot tell you the confidence boost and the joy that gave me. And I know it's because I left stuff behind at that retreat. I wanted to leave the fear, especially of physical activity. I wanted to leave that fear behind me. I am better now. And I needed to believe that. And that retreat gave me the belief that I am much, much better. I do have to live my life differently at the moment. I do still have to pace a little bit. I do have afternoon naps because I can right now. And I think that there's nothing wrong with that. I think that that's okay. I think perhaps if I'd done that a little bit before I got COVID, I might not have ended up where I did.
I love that. It's so beautiful. It's so definitive. Like, I am getting better. You're so much better, Bex. You're so much better. I love what you've shared. What an amazing story. Everything that you've just talked about is, I love it, so aligned with all of the things that I've learned and that I know that I need and that I see that other people really, really get changed and benefit from. It's the power of connection. The power of connection co-regulates our nervous system, which then helps it to calm. The power of focusing on joy and not fear. So good for the system, regulates, helps us to feel safe. And actually, it's really difficult to do unless you deliberately switch the focus, which is why, coming into the work that we do, coming into the classes, like in yesterday's Rest Repair class, I got everyone to show up wearing clothes that they would maybe go out and do the things that they love doing that they're not doing right now. So We had people in climbing gear. We had people in, dancing wear, party outfits. We had someone in a tent who'd put a tent up in the house, it was just beautiful because it's so important to keep having fun. And if you're not having fun, please do come in and try the Rest Repair program. We have 2 weeks free. You can just come in for 2 weeks, check it out. And if we drive you mad and it's all too much, then don't, but try your 2 weeks and then leave. No big deal. But, the classes are all focused on regulating the nervous system in a way that makes you feel connected with other people, supported, loved. You get entertained by some of the classes, not all of them. Some of them are very calming and grounding. But the Rest Repair classes in particular, we have group chat afterwards and we always have a bit of fun and a bit of banter. And some people just have it on in the background, literally like the radio, because it makes them giggle. And that, I think, get something like that. If it's not our program, find something that makes you laugh, that reminds you that there's more to it than your symptoms. There's more to you than your symptoms. This is my kind of demand to any listener out there. Don't sit with worry by yourself, worrying about it more and more. It's not helping you.
Can I just say, actually, I don't think in the 3 or so years that I have attended RRR and noticed that I'm still there, I can't quite let go because of the joy. I don't think there is a single class that went by where I didn't laugh out loud. Even in those early days when I was really poorly, I would smile and have a giggle to myself about something that you'd said or Ross said. So I think it was so important for me to have that little inkling of joy when I was really poorly. And even now, I still have to keep coming whenever I can, even if it's on catch up, because I just know that I'm going to laugh and I'm going to feel connected and I'm going to have that joy. So it is really, it was brilliant. It's so important.
Wonderful. Oh, Rebekah, well done. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us all. I'm hoping that it's inspirational for lots and lots of people who might be really stuck where you are. Guys, if you make a comment under the YouTube video, we do get to see them. And I'm sure Rebekah can have a little look on the channel and check in every now and again. If you want to kind of ask her questions, please do. But just know that it's possible. That's why this interview is being captured, because it's really important to share these stories. She was a kind of first waver. She was super sick. The booster did not help. And look at her today talking about recovery. It's been slow. She's the perfect hare and tortoise example. It's been slow, but she's been steady and she's stuck to a protocol that's worked for her, and it has changed her life in many ways for the better. Now we can say, you've learned a lot about yourself. You've learned about things that you've needed to kind of take out and deal with. You've changed the way that you work. You've probably got an extraordinary appreciation for life and freedom and love and happiness now. And it's so beautiful to hear you talk about all of this with such a positive kind of spin. So,
yeah.
Rebekah,
may I just?
Yes, I was about to say Rebekah Aiston, Hertfordshire, but yes, what would you like?
I'm so sorry. I just feel like I also have to give a quick shout out to some of the. I know we've talked a lot about the Rest Recover Repair classes, but I've also done a couple of other courses in terms of, I did the mindfulness with Annie. I did the compassion course with Annie through you guys. Game changers. Compassion for yourself when you are poorly is a game changer. So I just have to give a shout out to those other things that you do, because they have been an integral part of my recovery. And I wouldn't be where I am without any of it. But those were, super.
Oh, I love that. Well, Annie is our mindfulness teacher on 360's Rest Repair program, and she also runs these amazing courses. And we have a new one starting, actually. So if you're watching this, thank you very much, Rebekah, because there's a little plug for Annie's next course. So obviously, if you're watching this after May, the course has started. But we do run them regularly. So do check out the website for that, 360mindbodysoul.co.uk. Rebekah Aiston, Hertfordshire. There we go. I've said it again. Thank you so much for sharing your story. You are truly inspirational, and I'm honored that you have given me an hour of your time to share everything that's been going on for you. And I still see you in class. I'm not going to say goodbye. So it's been absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for everything, Susie. It's been amazing.
Thank you so much for listening to the Rest, Repair, Recover podcast. If today's episode gave you hope, made you smile, or even just helped you feel a bit less alone, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and maybe share it with someone who might need it too. So until next time, take care of yourselves and know that you're not on your own.